Hey Rex, thank you so much for joining me today. How are you?
Yeah, I'm well, sir. And George, it's a pleasure to be here. Pleasure to see you and meet you.
Yes, absolutely. It's an honor for me, man. And we've been connected through your son Scott, who I had on the podcast, and he's like, "I think you're going to need to chat with my dad." And so, we've had some phone calls and bringing us here, and we got some great things we're going to talk about. The restoration of the chestnuts. We're going to be talking about working with native tribes and the things that we can do collectively together to make sure that we are saving our forests for future generations. And so, I think at
Absolutely.
the beginning, like if you can tell me a little bit about how where you grew up and, maybe
Okay.
talk about that day around that campfire that you kind of saw something with your dad that kind of changed your trajectory and what you wanted to go in and working with the Forestry Service, if you wouldn't mind.
Well, sure, I'll do that. I'm a product of Appalachia, and we'll talk about the Appalachian uh, uh, residents and the society they built there in the Appalachians, and but I am a product of that, and I grew up uh, seeing chestnut in the woods. My dad, uh, who was educated in the first forestry school, but he had a sixth grade education, the old Baptist preacher. He uh, he uh, he told chestnut stories all the time because American chestnut, composed about one out of every five trees that grew in the Appalachian Mountains, all the way to Pennsylvania, New York. It was then and my dad saw that forest of huge chestnut trees when he was a kid. He hunted in them, and he knew the tree. Later in life, he was a logger, and he really got to see uh, how the chestnut dominated the forest and its value to beginning with the indigenous people, the native people, but also the settlers. Uh, the trees would easily grow 100 foot tall. It was often called the redwood of the East because the wood was so rot resistant. They used it for everything from cradles to coffins, and but every year the most important thing was it produced a huge crop of very nutritious American chestnuts that fed everything in the woods, including deer, bear, uh, a few bison that were running through the mountains up there, and the people, both the early Caucasian settlers and the tribal people. And they depended on it. They realized the value of the tree. And so I grew up hearing chestnut stories. My dad witnessed the blight, the American chestnut's been around for 50 million years. It originated in Asia, and in 1904, back up a step, the landowners and the farmers and the poor mountain people, every fall they would go into the woods, the whole family with tow sacks, and they would gather chestnuts by the bushel, take them to the country store, and swap up for things that they had no money to buy. These were poor people, but pair of shoes for the kids or coffees, things that they couldn't produce.
Hmm.
And so my dad saw that come in, and the chestnut was brought in on the chestnut blight, which is a fungus, was brought in on some Japanese chestnuts, and the Japanese chestnuts had the blight, and they were brought into New York City near the Brooklyn, and immediately the large chestnut trees began to die. This fungus was on the trees. It quickly attacked the chestnuts, and That was in 1904. And between 1904 and the end of the Second World War, 1945, between 4 and 5 billion American chestnut trees died. And I figured it up one time, if you could lay these dead chestnuts end to end, it would circle the globe 1.5 times. So it was a
Wow.
huge, it's been referred to as the greatest environmental disaster ever to strike North America because the forests changed completely. When I went to work as with the Forest Service, well, let me back up a step. You asked that question. Uh, when I was growing up, and by the way, if you wanted to, I did a TED talk about I don't know, early 70s that kind of told about my youth growing up with my dad and how I got into the chestnut uh, thing. But my dad, he was just an old timer. We had no television when I was growing up. We were just poor as church mice. And so our pastime in the wintertime was to gather around the old wood stove that heated the house. And my dad and other old folks who probably come visiting would tell stories. And just from the very beginning, I noticed that all these stories, somewhere or the other, ended up mentioning chestnut, American chestnut. And the simple reason was it was such a huge part of the life of the mountain people of Appalachia. It defined their quality of life. They were subsistence farmers, uh, and they. My dad tells a story of when he was a young man. He and a cousin who had an old T model Ford would load that old Ford down with sacks of American chestnut and several jugs of genuine moonshine whiskey. And they would drive to Washington, D.C., and this was common practice at that time. Country people would bring chestnuts into the big cities. They'd have a way to roast the things, and they'd sell them on the street. But where my dad really made his money was selling a little jug of moonshine whiskey to wash it down.
Got to have something
Uh,
to wash it down. Sure.
yes, exactly right. But they did that for years, and he would tell that story, and just the stories he told led me to become a forester. And and when I started work, and I worked 42 years with the U.S. Forest Service, and almost all of that, I did firefighting. I did a huge amount of forest firefighting for about 30 years, mostly in the West. But in the rest of the year, I was just a forester, and I managed wildlife and timber and everything else. But the woods at that time were full of standing dead chestnuts. And we called them gray ghosts because the wood decay, it like to never decayed, and it would stand for decades. And we called those old dead chestnuts gray ghosts. And you still see a few of them out there. But I had an opportunity early in my career to watch the forest change. And it changed from one that was dominated with this huge tree, American chestnut. And when they all died out, it was red maples or shrub trees that took over. And the change was dramatic. And the Appalachian people saw all that happening. My dad witnessed the changes in it, and he'd talk about when that blight hits, that the local people would say, surely it would kill all of them, you know. But in fact, it did. There are very few surviving large trees anywhere in North America now that escaped the blight. The largest chestnut trees in North America are on the West Coast, Washington, Oregon, Northern California, Idaho. And this is because the early settlers, when they migrated to the West to find land, they carried chestnuts with them because they thought so much of that tree. They were mostly mountain people from Appalachian. And they carried these chestnuts, planted them all over Oregon, Washington, Idaho, and the things prospered because the blight had come in through the New York Harbor and it never reached that part of North America. So these trees are huge out there, and they're the largest chestnuts in America in the world today. But I grew up hearing those stories, and after about 20 years, I heard about this organization that was doing research to restore the chestnut. And this was, this was 20 some years ago. As it ended up, I started a chapter of the Chestnut Foundation in Kentucky, where I was working as a forester at the time. And I have been in that, devoted all of my retired years working to restore that tree. And crazy thing, I did a TED talk. I was able to get the agreement started with the Eastern Band of the Cherokee Indians. And then when I got into that, I really was carried away with the thought of involving the tribal people in the restoration of the chestnut. Now, you what did in all these trees and did the same thing in Texas is we, the citizens of this wonderful country, we ignorance prevailed when it came to what happens when you bring a strange disease or a strange insect or a strange plant and drop it in our woods or get it started. And the native growth has never met that thing. They've never been around it. And they died like flies, man. And within just a period of about 30 or 40 years, we wiped them out. And they still sprout. They're a prolific sprouter. And the fungus, for whatever reason, is unable to kill the roots of the tree. There are other fungi in the ground that attack that thing when it gets in the ground, but they've never been able to come up, use this as a treatment. But the trees are prolific sprouters, and you can still find dozens, hundreds of these small chestnut sprouts in the forest. We use them in our breeding program because we've got a very active breeding program. It's showing a lot of promise, and we cross pure American trees that we find, like these little small chestnut sprouts, and we cross them with the Asian trees, who over the eons developed a resistance to the blight, as we call it. But in order to restore a tree, when we bring in, we now know ignorance prevailed for centuries, and uh, we immediately started to kill off not only trees and shrubs. Today, we're losing all of our ash trees, about 8 billion of them all over the United States, from an insect we brought in. We've lost numerous other trees. Butternut or white walnut was disappeared a long time ago. We're losing hemlock trees that are necessary if you want to have trout fishing because they furnish a deep shade, and the trout we have, if that water's not certain cold temperature, they won't reproduce. So, but the hemlock is dying. Oh man, we're losing
American elm.
American elm. We've already lost that. That's exactly right. But today we know the impact of this stuff. But the other thing we did with our early settlers, we brought all of our domesticated animals into the country, into the United North America, and turned them loose in the woods. And all the farmers just looked on the forest as open range, and they would take their cattle and their pigs and notch the ears so they could identify them, turn them loose during the growing season and through the fall into the forest, and they would fatten up and get ready for the winter by eating chestnut. Then in the fall, they would go round up these pigs and drive them back to their farm and kill them, for
Hmm.
their winter food. But when we brought those animals in and turned them loose, beginning in 1492, when Columbus made his first trip, we finally developed wooden ships that could cross the Atlantic Ocean. And he went to the Caribbean, and he had on his 3 ships, he had them loaded down with pigs to feed his sailors. Well, the pigs all had swine flu, and every disease that is fatal to humans, even including COVID, they first find a host that's a wild animal, birds or some kind. And in case of pigs, swine flu uh, uh, was found on wild pigs, and then over time, because the settlers lived so close to their livestock, that those diseases were able to jump from wild animals to domesticated animals. So when Columbus came to the Caribbean, we turned loose not only swine flu, but smallpox, chicken pox, mumps, measles, things that none of the tribes, and at that time they estimate there were at least 50 to 55 million native people in North America, South America, and in the Caribbean. Within 200 years, 90 to 95% of those folks were dead because they had no resistance to the blight, to the diseases,
Hmm.
and they died like flies. So today, even with our work, we've learned that if you want to restore a tree, the first thing we have to do is to develop a native tree that's similar to that thing that can withstand the diseases that are already here. Because once those things come in, they don't leave. They're here to stay. And it's like the chestnut blight was able to jump to oak trees, and the it will not kill the oak trees, but it allows the fungus to reproduce and throw out spores. And as luck would have it, on the West Coast in Northern California and Southern Oregon, there is a disease that was brought into that part of the country called sudden oak death. And this stuff, I don't know where it came from, Asia, I'm pretty sure, but it has killed literally millions of oak trees in that part of the world, in California. Not if that thing makes it to the east or the rest of the United States, but when it has the potential, and they've tested this in labs, it has the potential to kill all the oak trees remaining in North America. And what we lost with the chestnut tree would pale in comparison to what that stuff will do once it's turned loose. So the bit we're, but we finally are reaching a point where we've had some scientific success. The only answer to bringing this stuff back is through science and technology, and uh, and this this is especially important to me because in the past 10 years I've had 3 episodes of cancer, and starting with prostate cancer, starting with lymphoma 17, 18 years ago, and it was type 4 lymphoma. It was in my bone marrow, and but they were able. The oncologist was able to drive it into remission with some really harsh chemo. So I went on with my career, but about 2 years ago, I had a return visit of that lymphoma, and it usually hits you when you're young, and the experts believe that most people catch it from using Roundup, the stuff we spray the
Oh
weeds with.
yeah.
And that's likely where I got mine, but they drove it into remission. But when it came back, it was a very active cancer that attacked the stomach and the intestinal area. And was feeling really bad, but I had a PET scan done, went to the emergency room, and my stomach was just full of tumors, one of them the size of a softball. And so my son, who's retired from the military, helps me in all this restoration stuff that I do, lives in Florida, and he has a buddy he served in Afghanistan with, who was kind of chief of staff of this Moffitt Cancer Center. So uh, he got me in there, and they have some really cutting edge technology. They call it CAR T, and what it is that when that cancer, that lymphoma comes back, it immediately spreads all over your body. But they've worked out a process down there where this not a very pleasant subject. They put a little tube in my jugular vein, removed almost all the blood in my body into this little machine that I sat on the floor beside, and that thing had a device in there that made the whole machine spin, and they were able to separate out all the white cells in my body, thousands and thousands of them. And as near as I can tell, the only purpose, and one of those white blood cells is called a T cell. And the T cell's only purpose for being in our bodies is to attack and kill cells that should not be in there. So, what they did, they collected all the T cells in my body, sent them off to a lab. This is controversial genetic modification in Baltimore, Maryland, and they changed that thing. They genetically modified it by adding genes from some sort of chemo, so that the only cells that T cell would attack were the lymphoma cells that I had in my body. And the way they modified it, it has the ability to seek out these cancer cells, attach to the top of them, and then kill that cancer cell. Grows through it and kills the cell. And they also had these things multiply greatly. They're able to do that with today's technology. So instead of thousands that they took out of my body, they put in millions of them. And they put those things back in my body, and I still have to have a PET scan every 30 days. And they give you this radioactive stuff that makes all the cancer cells light up, whenever they go through a PET scan. And they could see immediately that these things started seeking out, hunting for the cancer cells, and immediately killing them one at a time. And the last PET scan I had, I was cancer free, you know. And this thing has become a cure for this return visit of lymphoma, which normally hits people who've had it before, but when they're old. And
Mhm.
I just I turned 80 years old about a year ago, but it has developed into a cure, and the experts think that it will likely be used very soon to treat other types of cancer that are really hard to treat, like different kinds of breast cancer and so forth. So the answer to restoring any kind of tree is to develop one that can live with and survive the whatever the thing is that kills them. And in American Chestnut, we had a couple of scientists up at Syracuse that were discovered that there's a number of plants, one of them being a wheat plant, a common wheat plant that we make bread from. And this wheat plant is attacked when the chestnut blight attacks a chestnut tree, it the blight puts out oxalic acid, very powerful acid, to kill the trunk of the tree, and then the fungus eats it. You know that it's the fungi eat dead wood, so death is very quick whenever these things get established. But they discovered that this wheat plant was attacked by the same type of disease, produced oxalic acid, but that particular plant had developed an element in the gene that neutralized oxalic acid. So it was like vaccinating a chestnut tree. Because with today's technology, they can take that gene from a wheat plant and insert it in the genome of a chestnut tree. And so we developed these things, and the federal government's got to approve them, just as they have to approve this stuff that cured my lymphoma.
Mm-hmm.
But it's very controversial. But it also is very effective. You know, there's a lot of resistance that comes into that chestnut tree, and it looks very, very promising. We could bring back the tree with this use of science. So we're still working very hard at that. We're doing just traditional plant breeding, just like we also like we do with corn and beans and any other vegetable. And we're having some good luck because we try to capture as many of the Asian tree genes and resistance to the disease, and we're having a lot of luck. But some of it is very controversial. The genetic modification in today's world is very controversial, and they accuse us of playing God. You know, accuse the scientists of playing God because you take a gene from one living species and insert that in a completely different living species, and so they accuse everybody involved with it with playing God. I'm not a particular religious guy, but my belief is that what we're doing is using a gift the guy upstairs gave us, this piece of hamburger between our ears that allows us to think and study science and technology. And it's much more acceptable if it's used to produce COVID vaccines or something like that. You know, if it goes to treat humanity, it's much more acceptable. But if we use it on an ecosystem, there are a lot of people who said nature's all powerful, just leave it alone and it'll take care of itself. Well, we learned when Columbus came over, that's not quite so. Humans were part of the ecosystem and they had zero resistance to all this stuff, and we killed 95% of it. And then we took their land. So the point I was going to make a while ago, there is no other group of folks that have been more mistreated by the rest of us than our native people. So part of my scheme was that all these people are really interested in restoring, particularly the chestnut tree. but also any other trees that were part of their culture. For the Ojibwe, it's birch. It's that they make canoes out of and baskets, and they want to focus on that if they can. Well, my scheme is to use the U.S. Forest Service that own millions of acres of land, use the American Chestnut Foundation that's working to restore chestnut, and the biggest contribution that's going to make is that we're laying a pathway of science and technology that can be used to restore all the other stuff that we're in danger of losing or having go extinct. So, but part of my grand scheme is involve all the tribes. You know that maybe it's guilt, Caucasian guilt here. You know that we try to, but it's their interest in it that fascinates me, and every one of them wants to play a part of it. So I developed this scheme. I worked 42 years with the Forest Service, and they, uh, I've got a lot of contacts within the feds, the government, and what brought this thing to a head was Hurricane Helene that almost wiped out Florida, and it wiped out 190,000 acres of eastern Cherokee homeland, and trees are down. It looks like 190,000 acres of strip mine if you drive through the woods and look at it. Well, that's a huge part of the Cherokee culture. You know, we've established a partnership with them. We've trained them in how we do this chestnut stuff, and they're willing partners. They want to be a part of this, and it's also an opportunity for us to give them some good training in the woods as they're working on this stuff. So my plan is to convince the Forest Service to approach every indigenous tribe that whose homeland is now part of this national forest system. And there's millions of acres of it, even in the east. And allow that tribe to utilize a chunk, maybe 100 acres, it might be 5,000 acres. And on that tract of land, they could work to help us, help the Forest Service and other people restore those trees and maybe animals that we're in danger of losing and using science and technology. But the other thing they could do, because any tribal people you talk to, there's two things they're concerned about. Number one, losing their language if they still have their language, and number two, losing their culture. Well, what I'm proposing is that piece of land that we permit the tribes to utilize, they'll work on restoring, helping Forest Service restore, co- correct the mess we've made of the land for several hundred years, but also give them an opportunity to replicate. This would be an educational project. Their culture, how their ancestors lived. What did their houses look like? How did they garden? What did they grow in their gardens? What did they kill out of the forest to survive the winter? But capture as much of their culture as we could. And this would be purely an educational program. We plan to secure funds to video this, to film it. Because the best way for the tribes to hang on to their culture is to have it captured on film. Then you have a film there or a video that could be used by any government agency, any school, anybody that wants to put on some training about how the native people live. So, and the Forest Service is buying into this. You know, they're very eager. This whole thing, I'm just really surprised and shocked that There is so much support developing for it. So I'm moving ahead with this thing full speed. Son Scott is helping me every step of the way, and I think we're going to be able to pull it off. But it's just amazing to me, and potentially this could be a very big deal with particularly with the government agencies like Forest Service. They're required by law. We still treat the tribes as sovereign nations because it was their land that when we first came over here, but we took
Hmm.
their land and gave them Oklahoma, parts of it, where it's difficult to grow the crops that they live with. Anyhow, that's my plan, and right now there appears to be a good deal of buy-in for it. We had a big meeting in Asheville this past week, and man, the powers that be in the Forest Service are telling me to move ahead with it. Just keep them informed, plugged into it. Plus, when the Hurricane Helene hit western North Carolina, it destroyed 190,000 acres of prime mountain land in there. The excellent chestnut land, huge. It's an area. Most of the reservation surrounds the Great Smoky Mountain National Park, and the Cherokee are really interested in fixing the damage. And the Forest Service is also very interested in getting every chestnut seedling that we can find. And as we work to restore or correct the damage that we did to that 190,000 acres, we're going to do it with chestnut, a tree that we wiped out, 100 and some years ago. And the big thing about it, when you look at all these people who do this stuff, including the chestnut group, most of them are struggling financially. They need support. They need financial support. They're talking about millions of dollars, maybe, that would come here to help restore this 190,000 acres of, uh, of mountain land, Cherokee homeland. But they like the idea of involving the tribes, and it's such a big area that it would be a huge opportunity for good publicity, or to a job. It would attract a lot of people would be drawn to that. But anyhow, pushing ahead with it. So that's my retirement job right there. If I can hang around, and my uh, my old oncologist, after my return of lymphoma, he said, "You really need to start collecting something like baseball cards instead of cancers if you can. So if you're going to do this kind of work." So if I can get reasonably healthy again, that's what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. But I've got a lot of people who are very interested in this. This is one reason I really wanted to meet you, because I know what you. All I got to do is look behind your head and see what's on these boards and listen to my son Scott. And I'm honored to be here today just to be a part of this. So I need to shut up and let you talk.
No, I am glad you've shared all that you've shared. It's a very important project, and I think it brings a lot of things full circle. I used to travel around with a guy named Harvey Arden, who was a National Geographic staff writer for 23 years, wrote a bunch of best-selling books, but his whole goal was he started a company where he was bringing the indigenous elders to the world and the world to the indigenous elders, and our goal was to try to capture everything we could from their personal stories, history,
You
messages
you
to the world.
mentioned this on your web page. I've got it. fact, you sent me a book or two or some
Yeah.
writing that you've already done.
Yes, sir. Yeah.
Soon as I can buy just a little breathing time, I'm gonna read that because it's fascinating.
Oh, it goes along with what you're talking about, the
Yeah,
idea of
yeah,
trying to preserve a culture and a message and a history,
absolutely.
and
Yeah,
especially in that digital form, trying to keep that, the goal is to have something for the future seventh generation, right? And
absolutely,
that it's,
absolutely.
what do they say? Like the best time to plant a tree was years ago. The second best
That's
time is
right.
today, right? Like
Okay,
the,
that's exactly right. But but the other thing that it covers this whole thing. One of the things that humans have at least paid some attention to since we began farming thousands of years ago is being halfway good stewards of the land so that our grandkids, and I think we have an obligation for our grandkids and those that come after them to let them inherit at least as productive and diverse chunk of land as we inherit. I think we're obliged to do that using whatever science is out there. We test the science. If it shows chances of working, let's try it, and give it the scientific test. So I believe it can be done, but it is anyhow. That's an old man's dream right there. I'm trying to think if there's anything I left out, but I'm really excited that the Forest Service and other groups are really anxious to play a part in this. And the tribes, it's really surprising to me because I've been doing a lot of thinking about what's in this for the tribes. And the biggest thing that I could come up with is this thing of recognizing the contributions they have made to us as a nation and understand that we're all one people, and
Mhm.
if they lose their language or their culture, we lose part of ours. And by filming their capturing as much of their culture, I think it's a huge, giant step toward expanded knowledge from an educational standpoint. Uh, we've got chestnut people that we did a documentary a couple of years ago on American Chestnut that actually was pretty professionally done,
Mhm.
and and the people in that group want to do shorter versions, but do it on things like Native American culture, and education, shorter shorter films. But they're going to try to use this project I'm working on if we can record video the culture that they demonstrate on these chunks of land we're going to give them permission to work on. That could be a very, very valuable educational thing that will be around forever, you know?
Sure. Sure.
Uh,
Well, it reminds me too, like when you were talking, even in your TED Talk and some of our discussions we've had before, you know, the indigenous people, wherever it is worldwide, right, wherever they are,
yeah,
most of the times those folks have lived for, millennia in that area and know those plants. They know those as
absolutely.
the medicines, as healing agents, as food, as nutrition,
Absolutely.
and all the
Yeah.
different ways that we're connected, and the big pharma comes in and tries to
Yeah.
take some plant and then
Yeah.
say, okay, we own this now. And they'll,
Yeah.
they try to
Yeah.
monopolize that where these
I know.
people know what is going to be best around them for those types of medicinal health.
Because they they're very observant. I've never met a tribal person that was not observant, and
Hmm.
they know they were very much aware a long time before we were of what kept that ecosystem going out there that they depended on.
Sure.
And one another short story that one of my hobbies is raising purple martins. I don't know if you've ever heard of those things, but uh, they're a bird that only catches flying insects. They once made their nests here all over the country. Well, there were some that lived in saguaro cactuses out in the
Hmm.
Southwest, but they once lived mostly in woodpecker holes and oak trees. That's the only species that was domesticated by native people. And what they did, they kept noticing that this strange purple bird. What the bird does, it catches flying insects. I've got a couple of hundred of them up here in my place in Kentucky. And but the insects they caught were tiny flying insects, the same kind that ate the maize and the beans and the
Right.
pumpkins and the squash that the tribes grew. So they came up with the idea. They also grew gourds. So they came up with the idea of planting a few gourds, just old dipper gourds, cut an opening in it, and lo and behold, these birds, which always come back to where they raise their young, and they winter in Brazil. They fly all the way to Brazil. All of the parents and the young of the year, thousands of miles. It's seven. Man, it's several days flight over the Gulf of Mexico and then they go all the way to Brazil and live in the jungles down there until spring comes to North America, and then they come back to where they raised their young the year before. But when you talk about contributions that Native Americans have made, as I get into this business of getting them involved, I want to try to install a purple martin colony in every tribal, every place they put this stuff. Put a few gourds up there and get some martins to come in there just to tell that story. It just
Yeah. No, it reminds me of like the bats. Like in we have a lot of bat colonies here in Texas, and
yeah,
they actually have, I'm not sure exactly. I think it was some type of radar system where they're able to see where they
it is.
fly out each night,
It
and
is.
they go
Yeah,
over
it's
all
a
these aggregate.
sonar system. They're
Yeah.
able to bounce off, and they know what's out there.
And they
And
they
they can identify a flying insect.
Yep.
Yeah,
And they go and they get these insects that are over these agricultural fields. And I think people
that's
don't
right.
understand how,
They don't.
birds and bats and how many different things are contributing to our way of life on a day-to-day basis and keeping our food system safe. And these are things that have been in play for millennia. And if we start to mess with those things, it's
Yeah,
going
that's
to be
right.
detrimental to our future and our children's and
And
grandchildren's
that's
future.
exactly right. That's exactly right. And that's part of the educational process that could be explained. That if we're able to do some of this filming of that would include the contributions that my own personal contribution belief is that our Caucasian ancestors who successfully fought the British during the Revolutionary War, we learned to fight that way from the Indians,
Mhm.
and had we not done that, we'd all have a heavy British accent today, I think, we if we had not done that. So there's a bunch of stuff like that could be recognized and could be identified as part of the culture, of these people, their contribution to how we live today.
Sure. It's a shoulders of giants thing, man. If the people who moved into an area had no idea about the
Yeah, exactly.
horticulture and being able to grow, they looked to the people who did it successfully for millennia, and that's how they were able to adapt. And then um
That's right.
it's a there's the Lakota is saying Mitaku Yeo Yasin, which is we are all related, we are all one, there's nothing that separates us. We all in this way, all the organisms, every single animal, every plant, flora,
Exactly right.
fauna, and
Yeah,
I think the sooner we recognize that and we learn to find our strengths within these different communities in order to be able to preserve these ways of life that we love so
that's
dear,
that's exactly right.
it's what we have to do. And so
And I see that as being a major goal. The other thing that strikes me, George, is tribal people have a better land ethic, if you will, than most of us do. They have more respect for the land out there. And an old Cherokee, my old buddy, the Cherokee elder, explained it this way to me. He said, most of us spend our lives taken from the land. And what we have to understand is there comes a time when we have to give back to the land. And the way I think we give back is to use this piece of hamburger here between our ears and try to correct the damage that we've already done, to the land and recognize the contributions that these other Americans, the tribal people, have made to this whole effort. And I think there's some real potential there to bring that story out, And I'm babbling again, so
Look,
forgive me.
no forgiveness needed. I think all these things are important. When you were talking about the idea of working with the Forestry Service and with the tribes, it also reminded me too, and I've done it on my own family land here in Texas, is working with your local USDA agent, your NRCS. There's different programs that are out there. We've taken out these, uh, you know, invasive species, well, animal
Yes,
too, with
sir.
hogs and stuff,
Yeah.
but we've done it with trees and shrubs, and we've replanted native grasses, and there's funds there for that. And
And tribal people could easily be a part of that.
absolutely,
They really could.
it
And
is. It's important.
yes, it is. And I don't know. I feel very hopeful uh, about continuing with this, but I would really treasure any inputs or advice you've got as we move on with it. Scott is really into it. He's really helping me with this, and so. But if you've got any thoughts on it, uh, I would love to hear them. Any
Oh,
advice for it all, buddy?
I
I would
I
love
I
to hear.
definitely my wheels are spinning every time I'm thinking about it. So there's a lot of tribes that I've worked with and traveled with and have relationships with that I'd love to chat and introduce you with. So we'll definitely continue to keep that those seeds of planting. And before we kind of separate for today, I wanted to ask you, with all the things that you're doing, and I know at the end of your TED talk you kind of mentioned too that your dad would be proud of the fact that you have gotten involved and are working on something that is so near and dear to his heart and the ancestors and all these people for hundreds of years. And it kind of got me thinking about, a question I ask a lot of my guests is one about legacy and how you view your legacy, or how you want it to be, something like, what is it that you hope that you're leaving behind, and that you're remembered by, and that, whether it's a movement, a personal, professional thing. And, just, is that something that, at this stage of your life you kind of think about? And is it something that you share a belief that you'd like to, expand upon a little bit with us today?
Well, I do a lot of thinking about that. And I don't want one of the things that turns me off is running into people that appear to worship themselves.
Hmm.
That think that I'm the only one that's important, and because if you get to that point where all that's important is that dude you're looking at the mirror at, there's no room left for kindness to anybody else, and I think there is much to be done in this arena. I call it leaving tracks, to leave some tracks and we left tracks back in the old days, and the native people also learning to read tracks was an art form. Their lives depended on it. And sometimes it was to find critters to eat, but sometimes it was a bountiful chunk of land that was useful for the tribe, or something that was good for the tribe. And leaving tracks sometimes involved maybe drawing a little arrow on the ground or breaking a branch so that those tracks could be followed, you know. And if I weren't 80 years old, I'd give some thoughts to trying to put this in in a book form or some way to because uh, I think as a species, as a country, the land ethic thing is one that I think if we really focused on that and have some talented Native Americans, and I think that with just a little bit of work with some of the tribal people, we would probably discover that their land ethic, how they viewed the land, their respect for it, is very similar, because just their history. I mean, there are eons that they spent depending on these ecosystems. And I think about how our citizenry today could benefit from having a land that level of respect for the woods, the ecosystems, the streams. Because when you look at this thing that bothers me of bringing in ever strange insect, they come in through world trade or international travel. We're not going to stop trading or traveling internationally, but we need to do something because there's no indications that this is going to slow down, and the damage will continue. And the only way to fix that, I think, is to try to instill in, particularly in our young people, a different way of looking at the land. That is, it's not just uh, uh, something to look at, but it's our lives right there, and we kind of owe that to our people. I think if we could start to upgrade that land ethic, and I don't know whose role that is. A lot of agencies and a lot of people would play a role in that. Like, for example, the Forest Service. If we're in the business of trying to restore some of the damage that's been done when ignorance prevailed, you know, think about the improvements to our quality of life if we could just stop this damage that's almost epidemic now. And with good science and good technology, I'd like to see that effort continue. And I'm just unsure how to uh, go to a next logical step. But I think that this tribal thing, I consider those folks the indigenous people, and I think back when in my youth, and you may remember this, there was a advertisement. I think they called it the Crying Indian.
Hmm.
The guy that's actually shedding some tears when he saw some people throwing garbage out the car window. But I think there's opportunities to really make some headway for all our people on a better land ethic, an ethic that suits better our needs, and those of our grandkids. And I think we owe it to them, to try to do that. I hope some way we can get that. And I think I'd like to see the Native people play a role in trying to get this word out. You know, maybe in the videos when we video some of their culture, get some of their best speakers and let them address this and get it down on film, babbling.
No,
But
these are great things, man. I'm so glad you shared it and that you're continuing to kind of build your vision and share it. And like you shared it with me and all the listeners here today. And I know I'll be putting down all the notes to some of the organizations we spoke about, to your TED Talk link. I think everyone needs to go see that. It's about 10 minutes, give or take, and it's wonderful. It kind of gives a good synopsis of what you're working towards. And you and I will just kind of keep in touch and see how we can kind of
we'll
help each
do
other
that,
along
buddy.
with this. And I'm once
We'll
again,
do
man,
that.
I'm so honored that you came and joined me today. And I
Hey, man, and the same here. The same here. You've made my day. So I want to stay in touch at your convenience. But uh, I think this thing has a lot of potential, and you can give us some tremendous help with it as you ponder on it. Yeah.
Well, I look forward to be a part of every step that everything you're doing. So,
All
Rex,
right.
thank you
Well,
again for joining me. And yeah, we'll
you're
maybe have
quite
to meet up
welcome.
and have you on again soon sometime.
We'll do that, buddy. All right. You
All
have
right.
a great day, and I want to read more about your deer down there also. That's fascinating
Working
story.
on another article. I'll send it your way.
All right. That'll be great.
You take
You have
care.
a good day. Thanks for what you do.
Thank you.